Well, welcome again to the 11th Annual Transforming Teaching and Learning Environment Virtual Conference. This is presented by Northeastern State University. We have 60 sessions through Friday the 14th. I'm Bob Hales, and you're so lucky I get to be your moderator. As a reminder, all of our sessions are closed caption. To view the caption, simply click on the closed caption icon on the toolbar at the bottom of the screen. And you will see the handiwork of Michelle, our captionist. Today's session is, as you see, break out of your online discussion rut with intentional design. We have with us Melissa Bryden and Jill Giacomini or something thereabout.
Giacomini, that was good. That was a good way of approaching it.
Let me turn it over to them and I'll go learn, get a pronunciation dictionary.
So hi everyone, I'm Melissa Bryden and I am associate professor at Regis. And when Jill was at Regis, she's now at University of Colorado Denver, but when we were together at Regis, we worked on a lot of classes together. And so we're going to share our toils and strife with you today. Jill, do you want to introduce yourself and say a couple?
Yeah, I'm Jill Giacomini, and as Melissa mentioned, I was at Regis for actually the past 7 years, and recently I changed over, I changed my position to the University of Colorado Denver. I'm still an instructional designer, but Melissa and I continue to collaborate on a number of different projects. So, and we're just going to be sharing with you today one of the projects that we collaborated on and learned a few things about. So I hope we're able to provide you with some ideas and insights.
So I felt like, you know, when Jill and I were meeting, we'd have these weekly meetings, which I referred to as Weight Watchers meetings, because I had to have some kind of product or something done before I met with her, otherwise I would get shamed. But so I continually was frustrated and felt like discussion was not what I wanted it, because it's very complicated with all the threads, and you know, you don't feel like you can reach every single student. Sometimes I really felt like a cat herder, and this video really represents how I felt.
And hopefully we can get the sound to work. We've tested it a few different times. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So if you can't hear the audio, we apologize. But I think you'll get the gist of it. It's kind of a funny video that exemplifies, as Melissa was saying, how we sometimes feel with online discussions.
People in the chat are saying they can't hear it.
Can people hear that? No?
No.
Can you hear it, Melissa?
I can't hear it either.
Okay.
But Jill's the only one who gets to laugh because she can.
Sorry. So I'm enjoying it, but it's something that if you get a chance to look it up, it's on YouTube. And it shows how online discussions can sometimes be somewhat of a frustrating experience. So why are we here? Melissa and I, as we've mentioned, we were frustrated with the sense that students were missing something in an online class that we were revising, and they were getting that something in the face-to-face version. This course happened to be Universal Design for Learning, a framework for teaching and learning. We believe that the way we're having students interact in the online discussion forum just wasn't providing an equivalent experience to the classroom discussion. A very different experience was being had, in fact. But it's hard when you're in that herding cats mentality to really figure out where to even begin. So we took a step back, and instead of starting with what wasn't working and trying to fix it, we went back to what we knew we felt was working, and that was the way that the students were interacting in the face-to-face version of the class. So as a part of this taking a step back, we created this simple table, and it had some categories, and it helped us to examine and do a comparison about exactly how discussion was used in each type of course. Pretty straightforward, and I won't go through each of these categories specifically, but you can see the types of categories that we were assessing for. We looked at how students were interacting, how discussion was being assessed, how effective it was for building community, the types of discussion that were taking place, and the sizes of the groups. And not surprisingly, what we realized by going through this process is that the discussion experience, it really was very different in each modality. So what going through this process helped us to do, though, was to zero in on exactly how they were different. We knew that they were different, but this really helped us, putting a pen to paper, helped us to see exactly what those differences were. So after doing this exercise, we took the information we uncovered and we discussed it with one another in the context of what we heard from students on our own and from what our own experiences were with this online discussion format. And what we came up with were the following basic challenges that you see here in the way discussion was currently designed in the online version of the course. So students often are overwhelmed with keeping up with all of the posts. The posting and reading can be really time consuming, and you get into that cycle of posting, waiting, responding. So that takes a lot of time. Also, a lot of times students feel like they have to conduct research before they post a response, so they don't feel like they're saying something stupid. It's hard to get to know people with a larger online course. It's just more difficult to create those relationships. And instructors often feel like they need to put on their assessment cap rather than in an online course, you're just having discussions, you're interacting. A lot of times they really felt like they needed to be assessing what students were saying rather than simply just listening to and responding to what they're saying. And what we found also is that students tend to, at sometimes, play the points game, depending on how your course is set up. But they would see how much a weekly discussion was worth, and then they may decide, this just isn't worth my time. And so they wouldn't engage at all. And so these were the challenges. So we realized we had quite a few challenges we needed to address after we sat down and we looked at all of this, and it definitely felt a bit overwhelming. Truly, it wasn't clear to us at all where to begin, but in the end, we decided we've got to do something. We really have to try something and see if that helps. It's much better than not doing anything at all. We knew that the way the discussion in the online course was designed, it wasn't working. So we came back to the table and we filled out, we went back to the table that we had filled out, and we looked at our list of challenges, and we came up with the following ideas to redesign discussion in the online version of the course. So first, in week 1, we decided that after students introduced themselves, that they would immediately be divided up into groups of 3 or 4. We told them that they were only going to be accountable to respond to their own group members, just those 3 or 4 other students for the rest of the course, as opposed to having 20 or 25 people that they're interacting with. But when we set up these groups, we did allow them to look in on others' discussions so that they could benefit from reading those discussions, but they weren't going to be participating in those. So it kind of took some of the pressure off of them there in terms of that post-response cycle. Also, a major change was that instead of grading discussion weekly, we changed it so that only 1 grade was given at the end of the course for discussion, very similar to the way it's done in many classroom courses. And to try and account for, to keep students feeling accountable to one another, that grade would not just be coming from the instructor, but it would be from a self-assessment of their own engagement, and also they would be assessed by the peers in their small group. So just to kind of give you an idea of the types of tools that we created in order to support this new format, you know that in the online environment, you have to be more intentional about putting things forward so that everyone is on the same page. So one of the tools that we created was this rubric, and it's a very simple rubric. It's what they use to assess themselves and one another at the end of the course, and also gave guidance for how the instructor would be assessing them. It provides some guidelines for regular and substantive participation, The thing that is important about this isn't so much what these particular criteria are on this rubric, but just so that they have an idea, as I said, about what the expectation is, and how they'll assess themselves and how they'll be assessing their peers. Another tool that we developed was this worksheet for the instructor to use when they were doing grading at the end. So while the rubric itself is fairly simple, we found that adding that peer and self-assessment piece made calculating the final grade a bit more complicated. So, and it took some thinking, but in the end, creating this spreadsheet helped to address that issue. It's designed so that you can see on this top part, this is just an example of how this works. As the assessment sheets come in, the instructor plugs those in and then it calculates those grades for them. So this was one support that we found was needed in order to help help instructors to be able to calculate that grade. So in order to assess how well our changes worked, we decided we needed to include a brief survey at the end of the course so we could find out, did this actually make a difference? So we asked students about their experience. And we also wanted to schedule a debrief with the instructor to find out how well the changes worked for her. And so this is what we found. The specifics the instructor shared with us were that seeing other groups' threads proved to be very beneficial to students. We didn't know if that was going to make a difference or not, but that really did. They really appreciated being able to go in and read what other groups were talking about. Students really, really loved the peer evaluations. It let them provide feedback to the instructor, not just when someone underperformed, but also when they performed very well. And students really, there was a lot of really great feedback there. And they like to give each other kudos. And we also found that this approach worked really, really well, unless you have a small group with non-participatory peers. And that really can throw things off a lot. So that was one challenge that was identified. But students shared with us that having discussions set up in this way made the discussion forum much easier to manage. It gave them much more of a purpose and productivity to the overall course. It helped them to build relationships. They really appreciated getting the constant constructive feedback that was consistent with that group feedback format. They also felt more connected to their peers. And one comment was that a student provided to us was in other courses that they would get to the discussions done right away and they really didn't learn from them. And in this course, their experience was different.
So Joel, we have a question from Vicki. Do other students see the peer review or just the instructor?
In this case, the way that we had it set up, and you could address this or approach this however you wanted, we had it was just the instructor. So Melissa, did you want to take over?
Yeah, so some of the things that that we had overall takeaways that were really positive. Students seemed to really like the peer grading. They felt more accountability, more engagement. Grading once at the end worked well because we made it worth 100 points. So it was 50% coming from the instructor and 50% coming from the student. So it really made more the points game. We took the points game element out of the question. There still were those occasional students in some of the groups that can cause a problem when they don't engage. They just they don't see the benefit of it for some reason, or we're not quite sure because we haven't really gotten any feedback from anyone stating why they didn't feel they wanted to participate. But some of the things that caused problems were when particular students, in this case of the class that we piloted this with, this particular class has an online, all the students are working together in the online environment and they're all working on a lesson plan. So in the discussion, the focus of the discussion groups is to talk about each piece of the lesson plan every week, share the piece that you are putting into your lesson plan, and then get feedback from your group. And when someone is seeking out feedback on their lesson plan and no one's giving it to them, or they want one particular person who maybe gave them a good idea before, just kind of checks out one week, it's very disappointing to them. So that's still, there's still going to be those issues of people who are not going to be participating just because they for some reason they haven't bought into it, or they think they can do okay without it for some reason. So if you're grading once at the end, how are you providing constant constructive feedback? So that's one of the questions from the chat. So think about it as in your classroom. If you set up your classroom and you have small groups set up around your face-to-face classroom, you as an instructor will go from group to group to group and give feedback, drop in, you do drop-ins, and you're talking to them. So that's the goal. That's what the instructor's job is in the groups. Every week, the instructor drops in every group and provides some kind of feedback, answers questions. If there's misconceptions or misinterpretations of anything, or someone's going the wrong direction, then you can provide feedback. If they're asking for feedback on some part of their lesson plan and they didn't get exactly what they wanted, then the instructor can intervene and can give feedback to that student. So you are giving constant constructive feedback, but you're not grading it every week. One of the reasons why we decided to take away the weekly grading is because the lesson plan is an ongoing assignment. So sometimes the discussions were happening, flowing from one week to the other. Also, some weeks students didn't have a whole lot to talk about because maybe it was straightforward, what's the title, what's the this, what's the that, those certain basic things that they didn't really need feedback. So we didn't grade every week, but we gave feedback every week. So I think, does that answer your question?
And Michelle also just commented, you can give feedback without giving a grade. It seems like this would be a time-saving strategy as well. And yes, that was one of the things that we had, this is why we had wanted to try it. We wanted to see how that worked because, as I mentioned at the beginning, it seemed like instructors would sometimes get caught up in this idea of, I have to assess my students, and they'd be reading every post with that assessment cap on, and it really could be a difficulty authentically engaging. And so in trying this method, we were trying to get to a place where we're allowing the instructors to really authentically engage and not have to be feeling like they're grading, which in a classroom, when you're having a discussion, you're not necessarily assessing everything a student says in that moment. You're trying to help to engage. So
yeah, and the other piece too is the idea that if I'm posting to the entire group within the group's thread, I can provide some feedback that's for the good of the whole group. And otherwise, if I just gave feedback to one person in a traditional discussion setup, that one person might be the only person who sees that comment. This way, the whole group sees, okay, well, maybe it's a good idea to do this. And then if I see as an instructor that there are a lot of misconceptions going on throughout all the groups, I can post something in the announcements that says, hey, I want to clear this up. There's maybe a little confusion about what goes into here or what you put in this part. And then that way everybody kind of benefits from that kind of group feedback.
are you ready for me to move on to the next slide, Melissa?
Yes. So we kind of took a backwards approach, and we didn't look at the research first. I know that's terrible, but because we really just wanted to try this, and we hadn't heard a lot about, anything kind of innovative going on. So we wanted to kind of jump into it and try, get our feet wet without preconceived notions of what we might expect. But afterwards, I decided, you know what, I got to put my researcher cap on, and I'm going to say, what are other researchers doing? Is anybody else talking about what's happening in discussion? What is the research behind engagement in the discussion group? with my research hat and being engaged in the field of special education, one of the things that we're always talk about in the field of education is how do we engage students. So we looked at the literature, and it does talk about, there are some researchers who are talking about the fact that just because an instructor may think students are engaged doesn't mean that they really are. Some people will just go through some assessment techniques with the discussion is just, did they do their initial post? Did they do their 2 posts? And you're checking off these boxes. But just because they did that, it doesn't necessarily mean that the students are engaged in the material. And it also doesn't mean that they're feeling positive about the engagement level that they're in the class. So that was interesting to find out, because that's how I felt when I was grading discussion. It was very superficial and very, oh, nice. I like that idea. Well, what did you like about the idea? So I think students were just jumping through a hoop. Everyone was jumping through hoops. And this backed up what my thinking was with the busy not equaling engagement. So the next part is critical thinking, and looked at, someone may be posting like 50 times, but that doesn't mean that it's involving any kind of critical thinking. The field of teacher education, in the case with this program and the course that's within this program, we want students to be thinking and reflective about what they're learning, and because we want teachers to be reflective about their teaching. So I didn't get a sense that was happening, but when students you turn the controls over to the students and you tell them what you post. I'm not going to give you a prompt. What you post and what you want to talk about is completely up to you. Their critical thinking and their understanding should increase, because they have more responsibility over their own learning. And when we're engaging them in this critical thinking, intellectual engagement starts happening, and they start to take a little bit more ownership over what they're sharing with their classmates. Students would start doing a little bit more researching things. Oh, hey, I found this thing that you can include in your lesson plan. I came across it when I was looking for mine. So, there's a little bit more intentionality between their posts. And so, Christine Royce, how did students' initial respond to not being given specific individual feedback to the post? Well, do you mean when they don't get feedback from their peers, or do you mean when they're not getting feedback from their instructor? Christine's question. So the level of education. So the level of education,
instructor, I think, was her question.
Okay, the instructor. So they're always getting feedback from the instructor, because the instructor should be dropping in on all the groups on a weekly basis with all the groups. So I never really heard that was an issue with them not getting initial feedback, because they were getting that initial feedback. The level of education majors, this class is taken by elementary, secondary majors, and special education majors at the graduate level.
And the way that these, if I may, the way that these groups were set up, the students were getting consistent feedback on their lesson plans, which is the way that these groups were organized. They were getting consistent feedback from their peers on their lesson plans, and the instructor was always reading everything, and if there was something that they needed to add to the peers' comments, then they would be getting that, then they would add that. So there was a high level of engagement. There just wasn't as much from the instructor, unless there needed to be something added to what peers were saying. Is that accurate, Melissa? Would that?
Yeah, and a lot of students, a lot of instructors, we leave what we call footprints. So they would say, I think you guys are on the right track. I like when I go in and I teach this course, I drop in and I say, I put on my teacher hat and I give them positive reinforcement because I want them to continue to do it. So I say, I really like the way that you guys are building off of each other's comments. I like the way that you're sharing materials with each other. Whatever it is that they're doing that I think that is really helping the good of the group, I think that you just have to positively reinforce that. Just leave a footprint. If there's not anything that you have to correct, you know, leave a footprint. Let them know I'm watching, I'm here, my eyes are on you. So, and I think that that helps, that also keeps them motivated. So the other piece that was missing, you know, I felt like in the class, because we do have some students who typically just take all their courses in online and don't ever get to meet face to face. And that came really apparent to me when I was at graduation one year, and I asked one of the students, "Hey, do you see any of your classmates?" She said, "I've never met any of them. I've only been in online classes. I don't even know who they are." And so I felt like, gosh, we really need to socially engage these students, and getting them into groups that's a little bit easier in a smaller group for them to get to know each other. And it's kind of interesting because I've kind of followed them into future classes where they were in groups. And then after this first initial class with them trying discussion groups, this is their second class they take, I will do this at other classes. And I'll notice that, oh, when I let them choose groups, they'll be in with groups that they've been in before because they liked the way that somebody engaged with them. So as teachers, we want them to be connected and collaborative because that's what they're going to need to do to be successful as teachers. So from the beginning, even if you can't be in a classroom learning how to collaborate, you're going to do it in the online environment as much as we can give you that experience. So when students can interact with their classmates and the instructor, we found the research says that there is a higher level of learning and they're more satisfied with their learning. Just because when you make connections with people, that connects with your learning. The fact that someone's going to share what they found with me or you know, share their perspective. I get to see all these other ways of viewing things. Someone's going to give me a great idea about what to do for my assessment on this particular, you know, part of my lesson plan. It's something that I think deepens their relationships and helps them learn really what it's like to be classroom teachers, even if they aren't going to be able to be in a classroom environment when they're learning how to be a teacher. So professional engagement is important in any field because when you're in the same profession, you have shared language. We found that in teacher education, it's important because they have this teacherese that they need to learn how to speak. And when they're forming communities and joining together, when they're in their classroom, when they become teachers and they have their 5th grade team meeting or their science team meeting or whatever meeting they're going to have, they already understand how do I communicate using this shared language. They can start learning professional vocabulary. One of the things that our program has in our special education program specifically, we have students who are learning to be teachers for the very first time in classrooms with veteran teachers because they're in the same class with students who are getting a master's degree and adding an endorsement. So we could sometimes have teachers who have been teaching for 10, 15, 20 years with students who have never set a foot in the classroom, so except for field work. But so they're really learning perspectives. They're really learning what is it like to be a teacher. They're learning some vocabulary and they're learning how things work. They're also networking with these experienced teachers. And I see relationships forming where, hey, come to my classroom and do some observations. I want to show you what this looks like. You know, come try your lesson, this part of your lesson plan in my classroom. You know, so it's really, really showing them how you can kind of build this foundation for lifelong learning.
Okay, so next steps, reflection and brainstorming. So after we tried this approach and looked at the research, Melissa and I were really hoping that we would figure out the next best templated way to approach online discussions. But we quickly realized that this is not an approach that would work the same way in every course. In this particular class, each student had an ongoing project, which was creating a lesson plan that they were building on throughout the course. Each week in the small group discussions, they were centered around providing feedback to each other on the area of the lesson plan that they were learning about and working on in that week. As Melissa talked about, the ongoing exchange of feedback within the small group provided students with lots of opportunities to build relationships with one another, and it helped them to build their own mini communities within the course. And that worked great, but depending on your content, depending on how your course is structured, this is something that may or may not really work for the design of your course. So unfortunately, we found out you can't use a cookie cutter approach in every class and have it turn out the same way. Oh, Melissa, you're muted.
Because my dogs are mumbling with me. So some of the things that I looked at trying, and one of the things that I do in my classroom-based classes, my face-to-face classes, is I do have them break into small groups. And when it's a course that involves heavy reading and I want them to be able to unpack that reading, we do some small group discussion, and we do the discussion roles. So I don't know if anyone's ever heard of Harvey Daniels, and in the K-12 public school realm, one of the things we teach in reading courses to promote comprehension is this idea of literature circles, where students are talking about the same piece of reading, and they each have a group, such as somebody's a connector, somebody's a summarizer, a questioner, somebody's an internet explorer. So they each have a role, and they each bring their contribution to the group, and they share out. So it's almost like a jigsaw puzzle, and everybody's putting a little piece of the puzzle together. So in one of the classes that I teach that has heavy reading, we do this instead of having a formal topic for them to talk about, although they still can talk about whatever they want, but putting them in the small groups really helps them focus, and giving them the roles is actually better than providing prompts, because they know what they're doing going in. They don't have to wonder, what am I going to say? I don't know what to say. Well, it's clear. I'm going to share what's on my discussion role sheet. And so it becomes kind of like it just works that way for them. Using synchronous meetings through Zoom for students, having some discussion groups like in that way. Somebody threw out to us, well, why don't you do no points for discussion? I'm like, ooh, yeah, I don't think that's going to work, just because they still need a carrot. I think they would just blow it off. I mean, I assume they would blow it off. A lot of people agree with me. Does anybody else think that they wouldn't blow it off? Everybody probably thinks they would blow it off. But we tried, the idea of mixing up the groups midterm so that they could work with a new group. And that we thought of that to solve the problem of, what do we do with the person who doesn't participate? Then that way you get a chance to be with people who might be participating more. Using Twitter and group texts, having them complete a group project as a group. I tried that. I thought it was a great idea, because I thought, well, maybe they can just turn in one lesson plan, but they all wanted to do their own. It was really, really strange. They wanted to have their own discussion. They wanted to have their own lesson plan at the end of the class that was their own, that they could try on their own. Because even though we put them in groups that were similar, like the elementary people would be together in one group, special education, secondary, so that they were sharing content that was within their own field, they still wanted to do their own thing. So that didn't work.
You tried.
Some were good attempts. some were good attempts, but the whole thing is you have to try. You just have to jump in there and try these ideas, because if you don't, you never know what you're going to get.
Right. Well, and to that point, how do you strike the right balance in online discussions? How do you do this? So what we learned from our experience is that it's important to start by asking yourself, what do I really want my students to be able to know and do when they complete my course? Your outcomes. You're like, what is it that you want them to do? So think about what you want your students to gain from discussion first, and then design a structure that supports this happening. And then you figure out the assessment piece. I think when we began this experience, the online course was set up in this templated way where it really was about the assessment, and the assessment, making sure that we were assessing students on their discussion, was kind of guiding how it was structured. And what we learned from going through this process was, don't start with that. Think about what you want your students to be able to gain from the experience, design it, and then figure out the assessment piece, whatever that is. Structure and discussion needs to support students in their interactions, and not overpower the authenticity of the engagement, which again, that's kind of the one size fits all approach. You're running the risk when you implement that without really thinking about how that fits into the design of your course. So just make sure you don't go so far that the emphasis becomes more about the assessment rather than providing students with a rich experience through the interaction. And if we're not mindful about keeping this balance, when we focus too heavily on the assessment, we may sacrifice the ability of our students to become authentically engaged. So that really was kind of the big takeaway. And it certainly is a balancing act, because, and I was looking at some of the chat comments that came in. Carrots are necessary a lot of times. You do have to have an assessment piece in there. You have to figure out how to keep them motivated. It would be so nice if everyone was intrinsically motivated to engage in online discussions. You have to figure out that structure, but you can't let the assessment guide the structure and decide how you're going to structure it.
Yeah, and that's interesting, Jill, because I kind of feel like they start to become intrinsically motivated to participate once they're getting feedback, when they're getting consistent feedback from their peers in the discussion, and asking, hey, what do you guys think of this idea for this? And they're getting feedback. I think it kind of leads them to just want to engage more, and because it's positive reinforcing. I mean, who doesn't like it when someone's replying to them? Nobody likes to feel ignored. So I have gone through discussion threads in a normal or typical class, and seen someone who, it's usually that late poster who posts like at 11:55, and nobody has a chance to have read and responded to them, so they don't ever get any feedback about what they say. But it kind of seems like when they get this idea that my peers are really depending on me, then it does become kind of, they really buy into it. I think, I think they do. And you see it kind of transforming from the first week to like by week 4. And you start to see them talking about other things other than their work. Like, hey, what'd you do this weekend? They start talking like they're friends, and they see each other in class all the time. So, that transformation really, really makes a difference. So if you're thinking about changing your approach to online discussion, think about some of these questions first. Really, what do you want? Is there a purpose for discussion? If it's posing these really, really deep questions, I have seen where people have to cite and use citations in APA style. Is the purpose of that to teach them how to use those tools? What is the purpose of it? What do you really want to measure? Do you really want to see students thinking, or are you just making sure that they're engaged? You're thinking they're engaged if they're doing this. And if they're authentically engaged, how can you put more into the discussion to make it more focused and more intentional, so that when you are assessing whether or not they're getting anything out of it, then it's really obvious other than students, it being okay for them to say, oh, well, that's a great idea, or perfect. I like that thought. They usually just will put very simple Twitter responses sometimes in their responses. But and then what are the strategies you're using, and are they helping students achieve what you want them to achieve in the course as a whole? Because the discussion is not by itself. The discussion is part of the whole course. Is this contributing to the course as a whole? I'm reading some of the group chats. So yeah, I think this idea of building community, this is really what I think is a really good point, because this is something that we're teaching them to do as teachers, and modeling that using the discussion forum and modeling how they can do this in lots of different modalities is something that I think is pretty beneficial. And then, yeah, I do agree, Michelle, that it could very be a Socratic method. One of the things that I have used, it's not on the list, but one of the things that I have used discussion for in the special education law class is I used it for online debate. And so the students were in groups and they had online debates about different education topics and laws. So I think you're right about that. So does anybody have any ideas that they want to share for that they've taken away, or how you can maybe adapt or modify what we've talked about in how we improved our online discussion forums?
And feel free to put it in the chat or to take yourself off of mute. Either way works. And we see here that Alice put a comment in the chat. Teaching is about building relationships and teaching teachers to learn how to build those relationships. This may work. So absolutely.
And, not just teachers have to learn how to build relationships. I think, with our technology connected generation now, one of the things that I teach undergrads and I teach graduates, and the undergrads who are like those 18, 19, 20-year-olds, putting them in groups and getting them to talk is like pulling teeth. They are so connected to their devices, and that's how they talk to each other, that when you actually ask them to engage in conversation, it's tricky. So getting them to talk more at a deeper level, even if it's in an online environment, is something that I think is going to help them in the workplace, no matter what field they're going in.
Right. Well, and I think the big takeaway, speaking for myself from this, is going back to that idea of looking at what's working. If you have an online course that you're trying to figure out how to make it a little bit better, and you've taught that course well and you like how it works in the classroom, looking at how that's working in the classroom and using that as an inspiration to get ideas for ways you might bring that into the online environment without letting the online structure, what we tend to think of as this is how you do discussions in an online forum, really just thinking of trying to take away those boundaries and thinking about that a little bit differently and getting inspiration and trying out something new. Because there might be some lessons there that you're missing. So Michelle says, let's see, who am I missing here? Should we read through some of these, Melissa?
Yeah, I noticed Michelle mentioned that she felt a little bit robotic when she was responding. So make it more personal when you can respond to the entire group. If you have 4 groups, then it's easier to respond to 4 groups than to 20 students. So so that makes it a lot more personalized, and you can actually respond to the specific discussion of the group.
Mm-hmm. It helps to individualize it a little bit more. And Melissa, let's see. Oh, yeah,
I responded.
Melissa
Vicky was
responded.
saying how it's nice to get them to talk about themselves and share their hobbies so they can see they have something in common. And that does really help. We do that with the first posting when they introduce themselves. And I think you're right. I think they automatically may discover, oh, we both have kids, or oh, we both grew up in Kansas, or whatever the case is. So I think we try to do that all the time, when we're teaching those icebreaker experiences to get the students out of their shells. So
Well, in this particular course, and I don't know that we mentioned this or not, but the way that we asked the instructor to break up the groups was to find those commonalities in the introductions and then set up the groups that way. And it could be done the other way as well. Like in this particular case, it made sense for students who are studying, similar subject areas. So they would be able to provide probably more in-depth feedback on the lesson plans. Is that right, Melissa? Would you agree with that? Because they're studying the same subject area. So in this particular course, that worked well. In another course, it might make more sense to intentionally mix students up a little bit so that they're with someone new. So let's see. Alice says, do you feel the peer assessment has been authentic? I've attempted a similar activity. I didn't feel that students were comfortable with this, with especially a group member who did not hold up their obligation. What do you think, Melissa?
Yeah, it's really interesting how brutally honest they are. I mean, sometimes you worry about that. I forget the name of it, that phenomenon where the students all say to each other, let's all give each other 100. So we all get 100. If you give me 100, I'll give you 100. But that doesn't happen. And in fact, people are harder on themselves than their peers. Like I had someone who posted all the time and she was very oh, it's just, I mean, I would have given myself 100 if I were her. She's like, well, I guess I could a little bit more attentive. Or so she gives herself a 95, But, I think it's important, the fact that it's anonymous and none of the other group members are going to see it. I think it is more authentic because there's even a place for them when they do their rating for them to state why they gave them that posting. It's like a rationale, why did I do this? So they don't just give the score, they have to put some statement as to how they how they got that score. So I get a little bit more of an idea of why somebody scored lower and then somebody scored consistently lower than everybody else, and everybody gave that one person low scores, then obviously that person just didn't engage. So and it does tend to be very consistent when it's just one person not participating. But I was kind of shocked at how authentic it was. Were you, Jill, when we looked at some of the feedback?
Yeah, I think that adding, as opposed to just, as you mentioned, instead of just having them give a score, requiring them to just a sentence or two, a short paragraph that really, it holds them accountable for their own scoring. It makes it a lot harder for them, not to say that they couldn't do that if they absolutely wanted to, but it really holds them more accountable for the scores they're providing to one another. And as you said, Melissa, the nice thing is you can see if there's a group of 4 students and 2 give each other 100s and the other 2 give give a much lower score, it kind of tips you off there may be more at work there. So it isn't a perfect system, but it does provide you with some valuable insights. Okay, and there's some really great information that's being posted here in the group chat, some ideas for introductions, having people engaging. I see what Candy said about having a student who is auditing the class, who's very knowledgeable, providing a lot of input and a lot of valuable information. Yeah, all of that. Just giving students the opportunity to engage with one another authentically can really be beneficial. So let's see. So to wrap it up, We have all of this information that we're more than happy to share with you all. Our email addresses are here. Please reach out to us. We're also going to be having a blog on this topic posted on the OLC website. We were thinking it was going to be today, but I haven't seen it yet, so it may have been postponed a little bit. But we're happy to share that with YouTube. But we can send out the copy of the presentation. We have a blank form for you to get started with your own comparison. We'd be happy to share the peer review rubric in the sheet, so you can see how that sheet was filled, how students filled out that sheet. And then also, if you're interested, the Excel sheet for grading. It's just a basic formula, but it was something that took us a little while to figure out, Melissa. Would you agree?
I
That
tell
once we
you,
got it figured out.
it really, really saves time. I teach this class every semester, and just plugging in the students, and then boom, it's like done for me. And I don't have to think about it. It's really nice. So if you do want those, any of those documents, just reach out to one of us and we're happy to share them with you.
Yeah, please. And again, just shoot us an email and we'll get those to you.
Yep. So,
And thank you, Melissa. And Jill, again, just like I think every presentation today, some good practical things we can walk away with and implement. That's what I love. So great. And obviously you had a lot of people interested in it. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for listening to us and for all the excellent questions and comments.
For sure.